Morning, Sean.
Good morning, Mike. Thank you for doing this. Good to see you again.
Oh, my pleasure.
I think everyone else has been muted. You're the only one that's unmuted. So for you guys that, as you guys know in the chat, you guys can just type in your questions as they appear. Um, and also this is on YouTube. If you guys are on YouTube, you guys are going to see some of this. If you want to see the whole thing, come on over to MeatRx. Mike, let me just, I know we talked a while ago, but I think it bears sort of just repeating, reintroducing yourself for those that aren't familiar with you, because you've done some really interesting stuff around the world of animal agriculture and trying to redefine the way we produce and as consumers access our food. So tell us a little bit about your background again, Mike, if you don't mind.
Sure. I farm and ranch out at St. Francis, Kansas, northwest corner of Kansas. It's just about 3 hours east of Denver. So Front Range of Colorado is our urban center. But I've been out there for about 45 years. I got out of Colorado State University in 1975 with an animal science degree. And I tell people, don't confuse that with animal husbandry. But I started raising livestock out in St. Francis. I built my first feedlot in 1978 with a group of partners. Operated that for about 8 years. And during that time, I really struggled to be successful in the cattle business. Which all of us did. The big farm crisis of the 80s occurred and lots of people went out of business. And I started looking at different things that could help me manage risk going forward and do a better job of producing food. And by the end of the 80s, I was fully convinced that I was in the wrong business. And I'd basically been playing in a fool's game based upon the education I got at Colorado State University around animal science. All this talk about efficiencies, economies of scale, you've got to get big or get out mentality. I just got pretty angry that I had actually believed that baloney. And so I started speaking out against the big power of the meat packers. And by then there was 4 packers controlling over 80% of the market. They were managing the market rather than competing in it. And so I really got aggressive. And by 1996, I had already built my second feeding operation, but with a better design and just a better operation and a whole kind of a different approach to the production of livestock. But I'd also sued IBP, which was the biggest beef packer in the country and the world at the time, Iowa Beef Processors. And I sued them for anti-competitive practices, along with another group of ranchers and cattle producers who felt the same as I did. And as that case progressed through the courts, I started thinking about doing something different. And so along the way to the courtroom, I started Ranch Foods Direct, which was my model of what I thought was ideal as far as the way we produce cattle, the way we process cattle, the way we deliver them to a consumer's plate. And so that's been my big project, is Ranch Foods Direct. But in the meantime, during that time in 2004, that case that was filed in 1996 against IBP finally made it to the courtroom, and we won. The jury awarded us $1.28 billion, and which we didn't care about. We cared about the injunctive relief that the case would eventually bring to make the meat packers stop manipulating the market and controlling the prices. Well, the problem we had immediately was the judge reversed the jury verdict, took it away from us, and we appealed it all the way to the Supreme Court. Oh, and by the way, the judge not only took the jury verdict away from us, but charged us for Tyson's court fees, which was just under $80,000. And this is on the cattlemen to pay after we won the case. So anyway, we pushed the case all the way to the Supreme Court. And there was 2 cases they were considering. There was either the cattleman's case for fair markets, which was, I thought, was the most important case in agriculture in 100 years, or the Anna Nicole Smith family feud case. Well, they chose Anna Nicole Smith's case. And it was just a serious big punch in the nose to cattle producers, but also to consumers, because now the big meat packers had the green light to just go like crazy, just get bigger, merge, control markets, industrialize the system. And so I was all the more incentivized to pursue my Ranch Foods Direct model. You know, having failed in legislative efforts, having failed in litigation efforts, you know, let's rebuild this food system that in a way that it becomes a more circular economy, where we build soil and raise animals humanely and treat workers well. I mean, that being the alternative. And so that's what I've been doing aggressively with Ranch Foods Direct now for the last 21 years now.
Yeah, Mike, you've been doing this stuff for decades. You know, you've been aware of the issues. It seems like more people have kind of come to note this problem with this packer monopoly or the collusion or the price fixing, you know, where the ranchers are basically being screwed at the bottom, and the packers are running up the retail prices, or you know, drawing all the profit. And they're sucking all the wealth out of these small towns. It's all being, you know, centralized. There's you know, I was approached by Senator Mike Rounds' staff to talk about this stuff, and you know, they've crafted a letter to you know, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, him and Tina Smith, another senator from Minneapolis. And you know, we've seen several of the state's attorneys generals file suit, or not file suit, but want to launch an investigation. So what's going on? Is there, I mean, what are your thoughts on breaking this thing up? Are we going to ever see like the telephone companies where the telcos were broken up in, I think it was the 80s? Are we going to see something like that happen, or what are your thoughts?
Yes, I do believe we're going to see it happen. I'm not sure how quickly. I hope quickly. But when you look at what they're doing now with the tech companies, you know, the hearing that the subcommittee, the Justice Subcommittee had on Google, Facebook, and Twitter, and basically voted out of that Justice Committee to break up the big tech firms. Too much concentrated power. And you know, we've always said that the greatest threat to any free society is the concentration of power and wealth into too few hands. I mean, that's what we thought in 1776 when we declared our independence. That's what Abraham Lincoln believed in the 1860s. And it's most certainly what we believed when we broke up the robber barons 100 years ago, and in particular the meat packers 100 years ago in 1921. And it's time to do it again. But the difference today is that the big multinational companies do own Congress. They have owned Congress, and through the revolving door, they very much control the government agencies that we deal with, whether it's USDA, you know, the Justice Department, the FDA. I mean, even in the Federal Aviation Administration, you know, is controlled by industry. And so we basically got to, step number one is take our government back. There is now a lot more talk about breaking up the concentrated power in this Biden administration. Barry Lam with Open Markets has really led the charge with a lot of people that he works with in his operation, that really shines the light on monopoly power. Monopoly power being the enemy of free enterprise, most certainly, and really the enemy of a capitalistic sort of structure. You know, capitalism without rules becomes monopoly, and that is what we have today. And so I'm encouraged. And one of the things I'm really encouraged with is Andy Green is now an advisor to the secretary. Andy Green is his antitrust sort of advisor, and Andy thinks the way that we do, that more local regional food systems would far better serve consumers and producers. It would give people a much more competitive marketplace with lots of buyers and lots of sellers and lots more producers. And so this is the model that I think works. I think it's the one that we very likely will end up with if we can get a lot more people to step up and become citizens once again and vote their interests and vote what's good for, you know, the planet. And of course, there's nothing better for the planet than a cow eating grass. And so you can do it in your everyday activity of what you choose to eat. But more important is where that food comes from. If you're supporting Tyson, Cargill, JBS, and Marfrig, you are supporting an industrial model that's contrary to all the things we care about, from humane treatment of livestock to the way workers are treated to the environment. But if you're buying local, if you're buying from small producers, smaller producers that are, farming in a regenerative way or ranching in a regenerative way, the cow can become the answer to our climate issues. It's like I was reading a book the other day, and the African culture is and the Indian culture, and those cultures really honor the cow, and so they talk about the importance of a cow. And Vandana Shiva told Hillary Clinton when in a visit to India back when under the Clinton administration, she said, Hillary, our cow dung is worth more than your Wall Street stocks. And of course, you might want to take offense to that, but when you really think about it, what that cow does, from pulling the plow to eating the grass and giving us the milk and the dairy and the cheese and all of that, that's very true. But also critical, whether you're a vegetarian, a vegan, or a meat eater, the manure that cow generates to restore soil health is extremely important. And under the industrial model of production, what we've done is concentrated animals into these massive feeding facilities where manure becomes a liability. So it's no longer spread across the land, where it can rebuild soil health and improve nutrition of both meat and vegetables. And so when you choose what you choose to eat and where it comes from, can make a major impact on all of our lives, including the rancher, the farmer who produced the food, as well as your personal health and the health of the planet.
Yeah, Mike, you said, early on, you heard the get big or, get out or get big or something like that. And, that's the industrial model, basically. You have to be, you have to do that way. And certainly they've demonstrated efficiencies, with feed utilization, with land utilization, water utilization, and so on and so forth. And that's the metric. But at the same time, it's come with a significant price, whether it's environmental issues, whether it's concentrated antibiotic usage, whether it's animal welfare type things. Because the mantra behind that is that's the only way you can make a profit. That's the only way you can produce food efficiently. I'm sure that's why many people do it, because they've been told, you've got, in order to do this, you've got to be in the system. What is the reality of that? When we talk about, because most ranchers don't, if they're going to continue to ranch, they want to be able to make a profit and live and, do that stuff. And so they're kind of sucked into this industrial model. What's the reality on that in your view?
Well, Sean, the reality is their efficiency argument is false. For example, let's just take how many workers or how many cows per day can a slaughterhouse worker process? Right now today with Tyson's 2 plants, Dakota City, Garden City, Kansas, their 2 biggest plants. When you divide the amount of animals by the workforce, right now it's under 1.6 animals per man per day. In a Callicrate cattle company with our small little processing plant designed to do up to 30 animals a day, we can do 4 animals per man per day. So who's more efficient? Well, the well-trained worker is going to be more efficient. And the well-trained worker is most likely a better paid worker. He's living in a rural community, a better community that maybe, serves. In other words, he's not living 7 families to a trailer house in Garden City, Kansas, in a trailer park, which is occurring. He probably has his own home. He probably drives a car that doesn't leak oil all over the parking lot at work every day. And then just on another point, water usage. The big meat packers are using over 700 gallons per animal processed. My small plant will use anywhere from 30 to 50 gallons of water per animal processed. And so you look at what a plant like I have will do for someone else that I process for. We process for a lot of different people who need market access. One of those companies that you're familiar with is called Mountain Primal. We process their animals, cut the meat up, and make it retail ready. And with that approach, Mountain Primal can achieve a 79% of the consumer dollar return back to the farm and ranch gate. And that's opposed to less than 40% now. So who's more efficient at returning income to the farm and ranch gate? Well, it's obviously the smaller processor, the local regional processor. And so in almost every respect, the small plant is more efficient. It certainly is better from a pathogen perspective, because one of the things that IBP will come back to me on and say, wait a minute, you're saying we produce less than 1.6 animals per worker per day, but we put them in a box. You don't put them in a box. And I'm saying, why do you put them in a box? We produce a carcass. The carcass goes to Colorado Springs, where skilled workers cut up the carcass direct into retail cuts. So now we've got the 6-7 day minimum age on those animals, to where now we get nearly 100% pathogen control through dry aging. You know, it's a proven concept for the last 10,000 years. But when they started putting that meat in a box so that they could reduce workers' wages all along the line to the retailer, and they also packaged the pathogen inside the bag so that when you open it, you got a problem. Well, then they started, you know, thinking about ways, some interventions to kill the pathogen, E. coli 157H7. I remember the jack-in-the-box problem in the 90s. Well, then they started coming up with these ideas on how to, you know, intervene on these pathogens. Well, none of those interventions have actually worked. None of them are 100%. None of them are as good as dry aging. And so who's more efficient? When we can take a carcass and turn it into a retail cut, sure, we're going to have some primals too that'll go to restaurants and institutional accounts or to other small meat markets that we may work with, but we are not going to put it in a box. And now just look at the price of cardboard. What happened when lumber prices increased? Now cardboard is skyrocketing. You know, and when we get a cyber attack, which I haven't had one, but it's not going to shut our kill floor down. It's not going to shut down our processing floor. You know, COVID hit. We didn't miss a day. And in fact, we increased our production because our demand increased so much. So really, who's more efficient? Who is more resilient? And who is really more sustainable long-term? It's the small local regional food system. But the big corporations who own government agencies get to write the rules. It doesn't matter if it's legislation or jury instructions. Those guys are writing the rules and writing the jury instructions through the judges, the D-red judges that, starting with Reagan, were appointed, giving us the economy that we have today that's highly concentrated. But food is different because we need food 3 times a day. And right now, we are an incredible risk of losing our ability to feed ourselves. You know, right now, the 2 biggest beef packers, or 2 of the biggest 4 beef packers, are foreign owned, Brazilian. In poultry as well. I mean, you know, JBS is at least the 2nd biggest poultry processor. They got hit by the cyber attack. They've got all kinds of felony accounts, you know, from bribing government officials in Brazil to inspectors putting rotten meat in the market. I just need someone to explain to me why they still have a grant of inspection or even a corporate charter. How are they even allowed to do business in this country? And look at the threat they give us from a food security, a national security perspective. You know, on the pork side, you got China with Smithfield. All they're basically doing is mining our soils and leaving their manure behind and taking the pork to China. We're part of their plan to feed themselves, but we don't have a plan of our own. We are now a net importer of food on a value basis and have been for some time. But as eaters, we can start to make different choices. There's been so many new plants, either on the drawing board or some already built across the country after COVID. And we realized that we don't like those empty shelves at the big box stores. So we've got a lot of new plants that are coming online, but I'm very worried that we're not going to support them. When they've got money invested, these are new facilities. These are sparkling, clean, well-designed. They're going to be great, but we've got to support them. But the big box stores, the dollar stores, the Walmarts, they are going to undermine these new investments that we've made in being able to feed ourselves. And we've got to be very careful that we don't go for their predatory pricing and them saying, hey, we got the same thing as Will Harris and Greg Gunthorpe and Mike Callicrate, except it's cheaper, buy from us. And of course, this all goes right in line with what normal consumers today consider normal in their life, and that is going to the big box store and buying everything at a discount. When in fact, the price they're paying is extremely high in the other areas, as you mentioned.
Mike, you've said, there's obviously big corporations, again, Marfrig, JBS being the two Brazilian-owned companies that, kind of write the rules as you say, or, they've got undue influence under the rule makers or the legislators. And yet you've been able to create this facility despite that rule set. So how did you do that? Is it unique to Kansas? Is it something that, is it unique state by state? Why can't other people replicate what you do? And then the other question is, why can't a grocery store, Kroger's, buy your meat and sell it and put it on the shelves alongside the Tyson beef and stuff like that? Is there a disincentive for you? Are you worried about they're going to say we're not going to buy it unless we pay, bottom dollar for it? Or what's the story on that?
Yeah. So first, the first question is, how did I do it? How did I build the model that I have? Well, it takes money. And luckily I've got another business that helps me fund the food venture that I'm in, the Ranch Foods Direct stuff. It's called the Callicrate Banner. It's a humane, bloodless, drug-free way to castrate bulls and goats and sheep and whatever has a scrotum, essentially. But anyway, we sell that product in 23 countries around the world. We employ 50 people in St. Francis, Kansas, in the manufacturing of that. So it's all domestic. So that has really helped me not go broke trying to build this model. This model, you're addressing an extremely powerful predatory environment in food. And so we've been there with some institutional accounts. At one time we had 5 school districts. We had 23 Chipotles. We've had our lessons. All of that business is gone. We got knocked out of Chipotle in favor of Australian beef, which came in at least 30% cheaper. And of course, that's when all of their food safety problems happened. And, there was a lot of economic loss for the corporation at that point. We've been in these school districts, the Good Food, we were part of the Good Food Project with District 11. All of that's gone now. The kids are back to eating, pretty darn low quality food. And so, I could make the argument that the local food movement ended about 5 or 6 years ago, and it's now been co-opted by these big companies. But when you try to sell to a Kroger or a Walmart or a Safeway, Albertsons, those guys are used to making a lot of margin on the beef. And the cowboys right now are getting a lot smarter in figuring out what animals should be worth. Right, like last week we had a choice box at $3.40. You calculate that out, that should be a $2 per 100 live weight price back to the cattle producer. Well, we're getting $1.20. So you can see how much of that share of the consumer dollar we've lost just in the wholesale market. But what the cowboys still need to recognize is not just what meat packers are selling to the retailer for, it's how much margin the retailer's making. Well, with that concentrated power and wealth in the retail sector, they have captured a much larger share of that total consumer dollar. We cannot live with them making that kind of margin. And the only way they ever give it up is with competition or the government stepping in and regulating them. Really, they should be regulated as a utility. I mean, they have become so big and so powerful that they're now a monopoly when you look at their shared power of the top 4 firms. And we probably need to step in and regulate them and limit them to a certain amount of margin. But the cowboys don't realize how much the retailer is taking. And the retailer is taking the largest share of what should be going back to that farm and ranch gate. And so we look at back in 1975, basically when I started in the cattle business, we were getting about 65% of the consumer dollar. Now remember, I mentioned Mountain Primal there, some of the folks that we cut for. they're getting like 79% back to their farm and ranch gate, producing a far superior product to the commodity market. But here we are with a fairly competitive marketplace. I could sell to as many as 20 packers back in 1978. Then I couldn't sell to any packers by 1998. But back in 1975, 1978 time period, we were getting 65% of the consumer dollar. Well, then what happened was the big packers consolidated and they really took control. And they were just like they were in 1921. They could dictate price to producers, and they could also turn around and dictate price to the big retailer. So the packer was the driver. They had the power in the transaction. And then Walmart started growing, and Kroger, and all those top four grocers, which is Whole Foods is in there now with Bezos, Jeff Bezos and Amazon when they bought Whole Foods. And so now we've got just unbelievable concentration of power and wealth at the retail level. And then they turn around and they dictate to the big packers. And of course, the big packers have justified one of the reasons they have to get bigger and buy out their competition is because they have to compete with the retailer. And so the big retailer, I talk about the big retailer robs the bank and the big packers drive the getaway car. They're really together. You can't separate them. They are partners. And so for us to try to sell to Kroger, we have to compete with a Tyson, a JBS, a Cargill, a Marfrig, who begin their whole supply chain by buying the animal below its cost of production. And then they employ refugee workers below living wage and externalize that cost onto the public. And then they degrade the environment with everything that is attached to the production of that livestock, from the corn that's produced below cost of production, with the glyphosate that's sprayed on all this farmland across the country to grow the soybeans and the corn that go into the diets that's fed to those animals. I mean, I can't think of anything they do that's good. And so when we think about replacing them with something, we've first of all got to come up with a better plan, which I think I've done with Ranch Foods Direct. I've learned along the way that you've got to go retail. You've simply got to go retail. You can't sell into the wholesale market because you give up too much margin. And so as we build this out across the country, we need city councils, we need county commissioners, we need state and federal governments to say, yes, this is the food system we want. This is the food system over here that's corporate controlled that we don't want. So how do we make it easier to do the right thing and harder for them to do the wrong thing? And this all comes in government policy, whether it's local, county, city, or state or federal. That policy can drive that kind of decision making that'll come right back down to the consumer. I mean, what if a dollar store actually had to pay the full cost of production on the stuff they sell? I mean, the dollar store has come into St. Francis, Kansas, which is the last step in your economic decline as a rural community with a healthy Main Street. First of all came the Walmart 30 miles away in Goodland, Kansas. Main Street died, and now the dollar store shows up on the edge of town. Just this week, they started putting in coolers and freezers. And so there might go our local grocery store. It's already been closed down once, but it got revived. So what's going to happen to that? And how are the people who grow our food even going to feed themselves when all they've got is a dollar store in their community? And the dollar store really is handling a waste stream. It's a secondhand economy. It's the truck wreck. It's whatever stuff is not worth anything. It's the expired date, is run out on the product. It's the ground beef with the full load of pink slime and every other additive they can think of, advanced meat recovery or whatever is in that product. It's the imported animals or beef that comes in from the cheapest place on the globe they can find it. It's just everything that's wrong in our economy, and particularly in our food system, to shop at a dollar store. And so maybe we can be like Tulsa in Oklahoma, and maybe we can make dollar stores illegal, or at least the further expansion of dollar stores illegal, and support an economy that supports the wealth creator, the farmer, the rancher, people who make things. Today, those enterprises, that sector of our economy is simply a cost to be reduced, like labor. And the big companies that in food in particular that control everything have the power to reduce those costs, and they've done it. And now they're really struggling trying to justify it. Boy, the cowboys are angry, and Governor Rounds or Senator Rounds and Tina Smith and there's others, and I'm surprised there aren't a lot more, are now coming to the defense of these wealth creators, these people on the land that, like Benjamin Franklin said, put a seed in the ground and add water and sunshine, as if in a continual miracle, wealth is created. Now, why would these be the people you want to get rid of? Why would you want fewer of those people stewarding that land and providing care to livestock? You certainly wouldn't. But if you're Walmart, you want a supply chain that serves your interest. If you're Bezos with Amazon, same thing. Kroger, the same thing. You know, it's like Eric Schlosser wrote in his book 20 years ago, Fast Food Nation. It was McDonald's that drove the concentration of the slaughter industry, the meatpacking industry, because they wanted the same hamburger all across the country. And so those are the kinds of things that we have to change. What if you had a Drifter's hamburger in your community or something like that, that was just the best tasting, you know, great burger with local suppliers? You know, we're lucky enough to have that in Colorado Springs. And we might not have that Drifter's hamburgers here without Ranch Foods Direct. And so we all have to work together. I think we got to go back. And like I said, I was lucky enough to have the financial wherewithal to be able to do this. But we cannot expect a rancher or a typical cattle producer to do what I did. It just can't happen. And this is why I think we need to go back to these communities and say, let's build a place. Let's build a public market. Let's build a place where these really great food enterprises can co-locate, and it becomes the place of the energy of the city. It's the heart and the soul of the city, or the urban center. Size appropriate. Just talking about one in Sheridan, Wyoming this morning, a possibility. You know, we've talked to the Minnesota Farmers Union, the Montana Farmers Union. What a great cooperative project that would be. But give people that alternative. Right now, if you're a consumer in the typical city of America, you don't have a Ranch Foods Direct, and you certainly don't have access to local regional food of any kind. All you've really got is Walmart, and don't ever expect them to do business with smaller farmers and ranchers. And you know, you talked about the get big or get out thing. You know, what about Seven Sons, the farm from Indiana? They were farming over 1,500 acres and losing money. And there were 7 boys and their dad, and their granddad was a dirt contractor for a long time, but they owned some land, but they were also leasing some land. And one day they got together and they said, you know, maybe we just need to get smaller to be more successful. And that's what they did. They got rid of about 1,000 acres of leased farmland and went back to what they owned. And man, have they been a success story. But it's all direct to the consumer sales. They're doing a little bit of stuff now through some, selling to markets and that, but just a really great model of an alternative that worked. And they worked because they got smaller, not because they got bigger.
Yeah, I'm just reminded that we're going to be talking to those guys this week on Thursday to talk about their operation. Let me ask you, Mike, you mentioned, the retailers and the packers are, scooping out a lot of this profit. There's X amount of money it's going to return per head of cattle, and they're taking the lion's share. So what would, let's say within your system, you're trying to provide a very good level of animal welfare, paying the workers a decent wage, and you're doing your own packing and your own slaughtering, and assume that's and we didn't talk about the production side, growing the animal, putting them on feed versus grass finished or whatever. But what should that look like at the consumer end? Let's just use ground beef as an option. And obviously there's regional variations on costs and that stuff, but what should I pay for a pound of ground beef raised in a way that you think is appropriate? What's a fair price you know, that we could do, because there's obviously price still is an issue for most consumers. I mean, most consumers make their food buying decisions many oftentimes on what does it taste like and how much it costs, and that's sort of the thing. So what kind of prices are we potentially looking at with, you know, if we can cut out the retail markup and the packer markup, so to speak?
Well, let's look at what USDA pushes out there every month for their average retail price of beef. If you go to my Callicrate.com and scroll down to that Minnesota Farmers Union presentation, you can look at that calculation and also see where to get that information. But last month it was $6.75 a pound, and that's everything from ground beef to porterhouses, ribeyes, strips. That's the entire animal, and that would be your average retail scanner price at a big box store. And so if you're able to buy at that price, so let's just say that Seven Sons were selling a quarter of beef at $6.75 a pound. What you're getting is all of the hamburgers one animal, instead of the test they did in '98 showed over 1,084 separate DNA in a quarter pound hamburger patty. It'd be far worse now, but they don't want to count it because they know it'd be worse, and consumers wouldn't like that much. But if we could just say we cut out the middleman, the big packer and the big retailer, and let's just agree that food is probably not too expensive, unless you're getting gouged by what the big packers have done during this COVID year. But let's just say that we could get this $6.75 on average back to that farm and ranch gate, and doing it all through someone like a Ranch Foods or one of the other processors that are out there. The consumer's getting a really good deal at $6.75, and the producer, we've got to increase their income or we're not going to have them. We aren't going to have. We've already lost 43% of our ranchers since the 80s. We've lost 84,000 feeders since then as well. We're not going to have them. So I'm not saying we need to lower the price to the consumer. If we could just get those dollars redirected where they go, and that's back to the farm and ranch gate. But we've delivered 79% of the consumer dollar back to our producers, and that's with workers getting paid a fair wage, working in a safe work environment, not being overly stressed, not sleeping 7 families to a trailer house in Garden City, Kansas. And so let's just look at the prices at Ranch Foods. We've got an 80/20 ground beef that's probably going to be at $5 and change. We've got more expensive cuts, which are the Wagyu Angus cross stuff that's really, really high premium and beautiful, just beautiful product. But, we haven't changed our prices in 2 or 3 years probably. Once in a while, we'll shift some pricing just to try to accommodate, how that animal breaks up. If we're getting too many orders for flat irons, if you raise the price a little bit, you can balance the animal better, assuming, considering what other business you may have in some wholesale markets. But that's one of the biggest challenges we have. And this is why I really like selling these quarters and halves and say, well, look, I can't hold a quarter. First of all, I don't have that much money. I don't have that big a freezer. So let's break it on down to eighths. So now we sell an eighth. Now it'll fit in a side-by-side refrigerator freezer, or one that's above the freezer above, and now it'll fit. It's going to be a little tight. You're probably going to have to get rid of some other stuff that has been in there too long anyway, but you can do it. And now you can start getting more creative on your recipes. We aren't all going to eat strips, ribeyes, and fillets. And boy, the rest of the animal, if it's produced right without performance enhancing drugs, in a humane manner, if it's not stressed prior to slaughter, these other cuts are so tender. I just had a culotte steak. You call it picanha. I've seen you cooking it in your oven. Wow, that is a piece of meat. And that is a way less expensive cut than any of the major steak cuts that we always talk about. And so we can start eating and experimenting with it and having a lot more fun at home preparing our food. But we can do it in a way by buying direct. I call it the cow pool. We've got the Ranch Foods Direct Cow Pool where you can buy as little as an eighth, or you can buy a whole animal if you want. But that is efficient because when that animal comes to our plant, it gets cut up, typically bone in, which is faster, higher yielding for the producer, but also we get a bone in the meat, which I think adds flavor, and it's got some health benefits as well. And so I like the bone-in chuck roast. You know, cook those 10 hours in a crock pot, you've got something that's seriously healthy now. And so I like to leave the bone in. It helps our processing go faster. We can get more stuff done in a day, and the producer has about 5% more yield than to sell to a consumer. And so that's the way I think we buy it. But now, on the other hand, go down the road west of Ranch Foods Direct on Fillmore in Colorado Springs, and there's a dollar store selling ground beef at less than $1 a pound. I'm not going to eat that stuff. But that is the waste economy that we are dealing with, that absolutely will prevent companies like mine from succeeding. We've even got institutional accounts that are buying that stuff. You know, after they tell their students how wonderful all the food is and how they support local food and agriculture and all of that, then they go to the dollar store and they buy that stuff and serve it in their cafeterias. Or they have a connection to the supplier of the dollar store. So this is a real threat. We have to make it very, very hard for dollar stores to exist. And you know, it's part of that secondhand economy where no one does well, except for the big companies that, because of tax benefits, when they give food away, like Walmart, Kroger, Albertson Safeway, when those companies give food away, they actually make as much, almost, or maybe even more than they do when they sell it at the retail counter, because of the double tax benefit they get. And of course, it's worth something for their appearance in the community to be philanthropic. What's that worth from a marketing perspective? But it's so destructive to the local regional economy.
And Mike, I want to, you know, it's interesting, you know, when you say, you know, I can put out, you know, a cow, you know, average all the cuts, you know, the steaks and the burger meat, and the, you know, throw some bones in there, and you can get it in there for $5-6 a pound on average. I think most people, you know, not everybody, most people, you know, if that's the same thing they're going to pay at the supermarket on average, or USDA, whatever, most people, having nobody, would prefer that method. I mean, I certainly would. I mean, I'd like, hey, if I can support a rancher and he can get more money, I'd much rather see him get the money than some, you know, criminals from Brazil, you know, basically.
Right.
But, you know, and the other thing is, you know, it's nice, you know, 1/8 of a cow will fit in a standard refrigerator, you know, the freezer side. Are there any laws? Because I mean, I keep seeing these things like, yeah, I can only sell halves and quarters in certain states, and that's some sort of without going through a USDA processing facility. What are the laws that prevent maybe people doing eighths? Or are there any laws that prevent that?
Well, there are laws that prevent people from using a custom processor to sell direct to the consumer. There are laws that require that consumer to actually own the animal, and then they have to pay the processing on the animal. And then if they've got 8 family members that want to divide it up, that's fine, they can do that. But it's it's onerous. It's very difficult. And then what happens is, when you buy the live animal, or you buy it in the hanging carcass weight, you're always wondering, where did my meat go? And so you've got all of that explanation of, well, first of all, a carcass yields 63%, maybe better, maybe less, depending on how fat it is. And then when we break that carcass down into the retail cuts, you know, we lose another 30%, and the consumer oftentimes just feels swindled when they get that meat home and they are weighing each box on the bathroom scale, and they're wondering what happened to the meat. It's just a really difficult thing to explain to people who don't know about our business. And so what a USDA inspected plant allows you to do is sell that product to anybody you want based upon the finished retail weight. And so I can still sell them a cow, like in a cow pool. I can have 8 customers, I can have, you know, 4 customers, whatever it is on that particular cow. But when they get home and they weigh their meat on the bathroom scale, they are getting exactly what they paid for. So if it is $6.75 a pound, which just happens to be our price today, If it is, they're happy. They've got what they paid for and it's in their freezer and they're happy. If they're buying through the custom plant that avoids USDA inspection, then they are all wondering what happened to my meat. And so when a plant goes USDA inspected, they take on more expense. Things slow down. There's going to be inspectors. There's going to be an inspector around, particularly in slaughter full time. They look at the animal before it's slaughtered. They look at the process of the slaughter. They check the organs, the glands, and all that stuff. And then that carcass is placed in a cooler. And so you've got a massive amount of paperwork. It's called the HACCP plan, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. And this has really become a barrier for a lot of people who would rather cut meat and process animals than do paperwork. And I don't know of too many people that are really good with a knife that are also good with a pen and pencil and paper or a laptop. They want to do work, not stand around to, trying to make USDA happy. And so I think we need to, and there are some states now like Wyoming, for example, that is letting ranchers sell pieces of the cow. Well, the problem with that is you end up with a freezer full of stuff that you didn't sell. And so if you can sell a part of a cow and make sure the freezers are clean every week or every 2 weeks or whatever it is, you never end up with that warehouse full of trim that's frozen that goes to some pet food outfit. And it gets sold off at the bankruptcy sale. You've got to get rid of the whole animal every single week. It's all got to go. And this is really something the big packers ran into, when they started growing and getting bigger, IBP in particular. IBP, started this box program with the New York meat trade through the mafia, through the New York mafia. If you go to my blog, you can look up mafia and it'll tell you the whole story of IBP's dealing with the New York mafia. But what they figured out when they got back there was these meat shops and retailers that they were selling to through this mafia connection weren't buying the whole animal. And if you got 6,000 animals coming in the door at your slaughterhouse, you better have 6,000 animals leaving. And what they were doing is they were getting backlogged on some stuff. And so what they did was, there was a guy by the name of Hughes Bagley he was an executive vice president for IBP, and he went to management and he says, look, let's do this cattle pack. So the big retailers that are going to buy the meat from IBP, let's make sure they're buying the equivalent of the whole animal. And we'll give them a little discount if they do that. And it worked brilliantly. Now they were moving the whole animal through their boxed beef distribution. And Hughes was credited for saving the company because it was going to break them because they weren't getting the whole animal marketed. Well, that's the same problem we have even on the small scale of one cow with one rancher. It's great if he can sell some ribeyes, but what's he going to do with the chuck and the round and the trim and the ground beef? He's got to sell the whole thing. And when I look at it from the perspective of a consumer, what is better, buying meat at $6.75 on average from Walmart, or buying meat at $6.75 on average from a rancher directly? Well, the Walmart meat is going to be produced with every performance enhancing drug known to man. In fact, it's the same performance enhancing drugs that athletes use to cheat. It's muscle growth and muscle promoting compounds. That's what we use on these cattle. We should not be using them. It impacts tenderness, impacts digestibility, it impacts the amount of marbling and fat that we need in our meat for the nutrition. And so that's what you're getting when you buy it at Walmart. You're also getting the full inclusion of the advanced meat recovery products. Pink slime, people know about that from the news from a few years ago. You're getting that in your meat now, and it requires no labeling for you to know that there's anhydrous ammonia been used in the processing of that ground beef as a food safety intervention. That should not be going in a human body. So you're getting that. And of course, in the burgers, we know there's from 1998 there were over 1,000 animals represented in a quarter-pound hamburger patty. So how many is there going to be in that pound of ground beef you buy in a big retail store? And so when you're spending that money at the big box, and like we've talked before, how are the workers treated? How are the animals treated? How many miles did that animal travel to that slaughterhouse? And so Garden City, Kansas, they put all these slaughterhouses out of business in our region. They're gone now. None of them exist anymore. And so those animals that were traveling maybe 50 miles to a packing plant are now traveling maybe 300 miles to a packing plant. And if you're in the Dakotas, you're putting 500 or 600 miles on a slaughter weight animal going to a slaughterhouse in Kansas, sometimes into Nebraska. And that's at the cost of the rancher or the cattle producer, the feeder. And so when a consumer really starts to get knowledgeable about how this whole system works, I think they're going to be much more favorable in supporting these local regional slaughterhouses and food systems.
Mike,
Sean, just one more thing.
Sure.
But what a rancher needs is a market. What a rancher needs in reality, if we can just make the market more fair and increase competition, and by doing that, you increase options of where you can sell and buy. But what a rancher needs is a market. They need a fair market. They don't have time to get in the meat business. I mean, we've made it as easy as we can for the rancher to be in the meat business. Like I talked about Mountain Primal. I mean, those guys, they're out there taking care of their cattle. And I take on the piece where we cut it up and give them back their finished product so they can sell it on the internet. So now they've got some folks hired that can handle the logistics of that. But most ranchers are not going to do that. They don't have time to do that. They might be running 500 or 1,000 cows, rotationally grazing. They're out there moving them every day. There's no way they have time to do what I've done or what Mountain Primal have done and a bunch of others that we cut for.
Yeah, Mike, I wanted just two questions. Phil's asking about, your thoughts on, mobile processors. That's been proposed as an option to kind of circumvent some of the USDA stuff, or I don't even, maybe you can do a mobile USDA. I'm not sure how that would work, but thoughts on that. And then also pending legislation you think is going to make a difference, and how do we support this? I mean, obviously we talked about Mike Rounds and Tina Smith, South Dakota and Minnesota respectively, but what are your thoughts on mobile processors and then any pending legislation or activities are going to make a difference here?
Yeah, the mobile slaughter thing, I just think, processing these animals where they are at. Never get on a truck, ideally. Like at Callicrate Cattle Company, they don't get on a truck. They're born there and they die there. Or they're born on the neighbor's place and they're coming in. They use our bulls, or they're, produced under the same protocol, and they come in to our place, so they don't get on the truck. Slaughter where the animal is, big benefit. When you have the slaughter waste, then can get composted into whatever biomass you have. If you're in Idaho, maybe it's going to be wood chips. If you're in Kansas, it's going to be manure from the cattle pens where you're feeding your cattle, or it's going to be, some hay that didn't turn out very well and the cows don't really want to eat it. So we can compost the slaughter waste into a very valuable soil amendment that can get put back on the land in the compost. The bones that are left over, let's turn those into bone char, which is equal parts calcium, phosphorus, and carbon. That gets blended back into the compost to go back on the land. It's just amazing if you can slaughter the animal where it is. The amount of water that we use, like in the mobile unit, is going to be anywhere from 30 to 50 gallons per head. I mean, you can't even make a pond with that. I mean, it just dries up on its way to a pond. But the thing is, the mobile unit really needs to be stationary. You can't move them around and make any money. And you can just imagine, your crew's all ready to go. The mobile unit's pulling out of the driveway and the ranch calls and says, hey, look, our cows got out last night. We thought the corral was in better shape, but it wasn't, or the help didn't show up, or we got a guy that's sick, or, whatever. It rained and the road's too muddy to get in. It doesn't work to move that mobile slaughter unit around, except for in very specialized locations, like off the coast of Washington State. There's a mobile unit that's been operating there for a very long time, and it does so successfully, but they're able to charge a lot more too. And so, but for me and my country, I think locating a mobile unit, or even better, perhaps a modular unit that gives you a little more height, a little more width, a little more size to work in, is equally easy to move around. You just call the crane in, lift it onto a flatbed, and you're off and running if you ever do need to sell it. But building a brick and mortar stationary plant, you got to have a lot of confidence it's going to work, because it doesn't have a second use. It is made to slaughter. And so we got to make sure we have the markets before we do any brick and mortar. But there's a brand new mobile, or I should say modular unit in Texas, in Marfa, Texas, that was just unloaded a few weeks ago. It's up, I think it's probably up and running now, but it is slaughter along with processing. But what I would like to see is, I would like to produce the carcass in the country where the animal is, and then I want to transport that carcass as needed, depending on the amount of storage you have there for the carcasses. We transport once a week to Colorado Springs, maybe a little more often perhaps, but we transport the carcass to the urban center where the eaters are. And it is on full display. People can see the carcasses hanging in the cooler. They can see the men or the women working in the cut room, and they can see the meat displayed in the fresh case or on the shelf in the market. That's my dream, is to put these little carcass shops in around the country that have everything on full display, whether it's Sheridan, Wyoming, or Colby, Kansas. I don't know, but it can be size appropriate. But let's show people what's going on. If it's got boxed beef stacked in the cooler, I don't want to buy it. I don't want to go there. I want to see a carcass hanging. And that, I think that could be way too much fun. And hey, co-locate with your best friend that makes the best sourdough bread you ever ate. Co-locate with that cheese maker, or the lady that makes that awesome butter that actually spreads on your toast instead of, you know what I mean? It's real food. Think about all the real food friends you have and co-locate with them. But I want to make this whole food thing a big deal in these urban centers, because we've got a whole generation now of younger people that are looking for
it. We also have a whole generation of people who probably pass out from listen, these vegans would probably pass out walking by there looking at that stuff. But regardless,
Sean, let me tell you something. Just let me quickly tell you a story. The Edible Beats group of restaurants in Denver have been longtime customers of Ranch Foods Direct and Callicrate Cattle Company. And so they load up this bus of like 56 people. So it's one of those big touring buses. And they've done this more than once, but just in the last 2 years ago, I think it was, they came out before COVID, and they had everybody on there from the the dishwasher to the owner, to the chef, to the servers. Everybody's on the bus. And they come out to St. Francis, and they get the full tour of operation. They see the cattle and the pigs, and we serve them a really nice lunch. And then we walk into the slaughter facility. And the guys have been slaughtering all along that day while this tour group is there. But now they're going to get to watch an entire slaughter, from when the animal comes in the chute, it's knocked, and the carcass is hanging in the cooler. Sean, there was only one person that didn't go in the room. 50 some people stood in that room and watched every single step of it. And these are a lot of younger people. So, there was a lot of tattoos, there was some piercings, it was a cool, diverse, awesome group of people. And not a single one of them were offended. In fact, and the guy that didn't come in the room just didn't think he could handle it, so he didn't. He kind of watched through the door, but even he wasn't offended. But all of them said it changed their world. It changed their whole thinking around what an animal does for the human being in the way of its sacrifice, and how it deserves, to be treated with dignity and respect and humane. And it really, I think it was a transformation of thinking in that room. So yeah, but I get it. When you come into our food hub in Colorado Springs and the carcass room door is open, and only thing is closed are the transparent flaps that keep the cold in. I had a vegan come in one day that picks up here at one of our CSA drop-offs, and she says, "Man, I just love this place. Everything except for that." And she pointed at the carcass cooler where you could see them hanging. But hey, that's one person out of how many? And, if she understood how the production of those cattle and the way that we do it added value and nutrition to the vegetables that she eats, maybe she's got a better understanding, can respect that better, and realize how important that animal is in her life as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a point that's often lost. I mean, all animals end up food one way or the other. They're all, I mean, every animal that ever lived turns into food at some point. Either it's another animal or microbes. There's a nice study out of Universal Pennsylvania looking at white-tailed deer, and like 70% lost to predation before 34 weeks of age. I mean, what we do in our food production system, we give those animals a fairly high quality of life, longer than they live in the wild for sure. In many cases, and they end up having a decent quality of life, and they are respected. I think that's an important thing to realize. Let me ask you, I guess one thought on this. We hear a lot of, I don't know if you want to call it conspiracy theory or whatever, people saying the world is out to eliminate meat from the human diet. There's policies that are being, people behind the scenes, Bill Gates, in his evil horns is going to, force everybody to eat worms and bugs and stuff like that. What do you, as somebody that's in that, do you see any validity to that, or is that just more hyperbole? Is there, I mean, how long are we going to be eating meat for? I mean, is this something that's going to be here to stay? I mean, it's $1 trillion industry. I mean, a lot of people depend on it. I mean, how long is the meat system going to be around? Are you concerned about it going away anytime soon?
Well, the meat system is going to be around. It's not going anywhere, but it's going to really have some challenges with these seriously misguided and I mean, people who are just lack understanding and of how the whole world works. But to think that we're going to eat fake meat, whether it's the cell cultured stuff or the vegetable based alternatives, is just really, I think, a lack of having grandparents that had a farm, or parents that had a farm, or a place that you could go and drink raw milk and gather eggs and see a sow have piglets and realize, how that all finally gets to your plate. And it's also an over reliance on technology. There are a lot of people that just think technology is everything. It's going to solve everything. Bill Gates would be probably one of those. But they really like technology that they can patent, like they've done on some of this cell cultured and vegetable alternative to beef. And so it's about market control. It's about getting rich, but it's really terribly misguided in its whole thinking. I mean, we're going to grow more corn, soybeans, and peas in an industrial manner on the broad, big acres. With the big tractors and the spray rigs, so that we can eat fake meat, with and making some guy with a patent on that process rich, and we're going to bypass the actual land steward that is out there taking care of livestock and improving soil health and sequestering carbon. We're crazy. I mean, we've got to eat real meat, and if we're going to be healthy. And what really worries me right now is the big meat packers, all four of them. They all manage both supply and demand of the species that they handle, whether it's poultry, pork, or beef. They do all of them, so they can increase the price on one to reduce the demand and increase the demand on something they can maybe lower the price on. So like Tyson, if they want to move more beef, all they got to do is raise the price of poultry, raise the price of pork, and they can move more beef. So now enter in the alt meat, the other meat that they don't traditionally handle, that all of them now are invested in some way in. So now we bring in the alt meat, and now we can discount that in relation to the real meat, and now we've got something that's truly scary, that they can now promote, the sale of the alt meat, because we're all a society of price shoppers, which to me is the most deadly disease of all, this aggressive price shopping consumerism. But in that thinking, they're going to go for this alt meat. And I don't know if you noticed during COVID, all those pictures of empty meat counters and cases, what was remaining in the pictures that you saw was the fake meat. And it's not nearly as popular as the companies that make it want you to think it is. But with enough advertising, and if they get their prices down, there's going to be people that do buy it. But also what really worries me is when the schools are looking at the possibility of serving that to children. This is not real food. It should not be served to children. We should be supporting a circular economy, a regenerative farming and ranching industry that improves soil health every single day, that has good animal welfare and great nutrition in the product that's produced. So I don't see meat going anywhere, but we're going to have to get a lot more interest among citizens and leaders in Congress to help us make it harder for the alt meat to be produced and easier for the good stuff to be produced. But as far as the bills that are in Congress right now, there's bills, I think, with good intentions, but they don't go near far enough. Not near far enough. We've got to break up the big meat packers. And if you've got a congressman or a senator or even local state leaders, we really need to get with them and let them know what's going on. What's happened with the Tyson fire and the COVID disaster, and now we've had the cyber attack. Really, what they've done is shown you how fragile this industrial, so-called efficient food system has become, and how we got to replace it as quickly as we can. So whatever legislation, whatever infrastructure funding that may be out there, what is more important infrastructure than the ability to get food from the farm to the plate? That is the most important infrastructure, way more important than a highway or a bridge. So let's build that, but then at the same time, we've got to protect it with really good antitrust laws that stop the predators of the world from taking out the little guys that are doing things right.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, like a lot of people are critical of capitalism, and I think what they're really critical of is corruption within that system. I think it's not the capitalism, it's the corruption that is sometimes isn't within any system. And so
Exactly.
we got to root out the corruption and keep a competitive fair market advantage and that type of stuff. Well, Mike, thank you so much. We've just flew through an hour. I'm sure we could talk for days, but and hopefully we'll continue this conversation down the road as things progress. And, where can people go to find, one, to buy meat from you if they want to, and number two, where to find you, to follow you, to find more information?
Go to mycallicrate.com. I've got a blog on there that you can read. I've got a listserv. I send out an article from time to time that I think is important. But everything that I do is on that site, so you can see what else is happening, including going to our Ranch Foods Direct site that's on there as well. And you can also get a tour of Callicrate Cattle Company when you go to that site.
Awesome. Well, we've got, like I said, we've got a very motivated group of people in this community which continues to grow. Every single week we get more and more members here, and that this sort of appreciation for the healthfulness of meat, because that's something that even members of the ranching community I don't think are quite up to speed on how healthy meat is. And so some of them are still under the belief that it causes cancer and heart disease and all that sort of nonsense that's out there. But yeah, we're going to continue to support these types of initiatives. And thank you so much for doing what you're doing. And have a great start of your week, Mike. Take care.
Okay, Sean. Thanks for your work. Bye.
All right. See everybody. See you guys tomorrow. Bye bye.